China is hosting representatives of 130 nations for a forum that marks the 10th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative, one closely backed by Russia as a means of international cooperation. And at the top of the list of the invitees to China's Belt and Road Forum was Russian President Vladimir Putin, who arrived in China today ahead of his meetings with Xi Jinping. Now, this is his first trip to China since the Ukraine war triggered Western moves to isolate Putin's regime. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov had already arrived at the forum, met his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi, and after this Beijing visit, Russia's foreign minister will visit North Korea as per North Korean state media. And at a time when Russia has been largely isolated on the global stage, and as the world witnesses two wars, what does one make of this apparent warming of ties between Russia, China and North Korea? To discuss this, we have with us Mr. Ben Aris, founder and editor-in-chief of BNE IntelliNews, also former Moscow bureau chief of the Daily Telegraph. So thank you so much for joining us on WION.
My pleasure.
Now, just to begin with, sir, let's start by talking about Russian President Putin's visit to China for the BRI summit. This, in fact, is his first such visit since the war in Ukraine triggered Russia's international isolation. How do you assess the significance of this trip?
Well, it's another signal by Putin to show that the alliance between Beijing and Moscow is very strong and in defiance of the West, in so much as the ICC, the International Criminal Court, slapped an arrest warrant on Putin, I think it was in March, for allegedly kidnapping Ukrainian children. Hundreds of children have been taken from the war zone into Russia. And that put an effective ban on him doing any international trips. He was due to go to the Belt and Road Initiative in Africa, South Africa, earlier this year. And there was a lot of pressure by the Africans to try and get him to go. But in the end, it was deemed impossible because of this arrest warrant. Any country that signed up to the Rome Statutes is obliged to arrest him should he turn up. Now, of course, China has not signed up to the Rome Statutes, to the ICC. And therefore, he can go there with impunity. But as I say, since Putin's been made a pariah, an international pariah by this arrest warrant, the fact that China is welcoming him to be a key speaker at this meeting of the Belt and Road Initiative, a celebration for 10 years, then there's an act of defiance where China is saying that we stand with Russia in their conflict with the West, and we will not be subject to sanctions nor be told what to do.
Right, let's talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, perhaps China's most ambitious international infrastructure project. It's been closely backed by Russia. This is perceived as another milestone in the warming ties between Russia and China. What's your take on this?
Indeed. I mean, the Chinese are very interested in connecting with Europe, the other really huge market in the world. And the problem is going by sea, as you have to now, that the Chinese virtually have no navy to speak of and that the oceans are dominated by US naval power. And what they're looking here for is an overland route that is secure, that is not under threat by these maritime powers, this rivalry. And that means driving a road from Beijing through Central Asia, through the middle corridor, ending up in Europe, in order to facilitate that trade, which is entirely under China's control. It's an extremely ambitious project, but it's also like recreating the old Silk Road overland. And of course, most of that territory runs through Eurasia, which is Russia's backyard. And the Chinese foreign policy has said quite clearly that it wants to develop its relationships with the Eurasia Economic Union, and that's also in Russia's interest because its entire trade was heavily pointed towards Europe before, particularly in the energy, but not only. And then Russia's been cut off from Europe completely by the sanctions. It does very little trade now. And so Russia is also interested in expanding its trade corridor and connecting with the huge Asian markets, because the Asian markets, the global south in general, has not bought into the sanctions. They sort of agree with China and Russia that there should be a multipolar world. They see the wars in Europe, the Ukraine war in particular, as a European problem, nothing to do with them. And so all these countries along the road are also invested in developing the Belt and Road ties, the logistic link between Asia and Europe.
Right, now as panelists' predictions, this may pave way for China and Russia to further bolster cooperation in areas of trade, economy, something you mentioned as well, further investment. So just for better clarity on this, how do you see bilateral cooperation evolving going forward?
Well, it's going very fast. I mean, Russia was cut off from its oil exports at the start of this year to Europe, which took up 70%. Nearly all the gas that Russia was selling was going to Europe. And now it's managed to successfully reorientate, all of that energy trade to Asia. And so India and China in particular have stepped in, and they're buying all the crude oil that Russia used to export to Europe now goes to those two countries, which are refining it and then selling it into the international market. But then the trade with Russia and China, specifically the general trade turnover, is up, I think, to about just under $150 billion, just short of the $200 billion trade turnover they had as a goal. And this is almost double what it was a few years ago. So the trade with Russia going east is flourishing, and China is the key market there. It buys a lot of the imports and also provides Russia with a lot of the inputs it needs in terms of manufactured goods, etc. And that's going to continue. And now Putin's focus, and this is why he's going to this meeting, because everybody in the global south is going to be at this meeting. 150 relationships between China as part of this deal. 130 people have turned up. And the Europeans, I think only Italy is a member of the BRI. And Orban, the Hungarian president, will be probably the only European there. So this is very much a sort of global South compact where they're all getting together to talk about economic ties, logistics, trade, all the practical things that countries are interested in developing their economies.
Right. Now, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, as I mentioned earlier, is in China as well. And as per North Korean state media, Sergei Lavrov will visit North Korea right after this, after we saw North Korea's present visit. What do you think is brewing on that front?
Well, again, they're building a coalition, aren't they, of non-aligned, non-G7, non-Western countries. And North Korea has been a pariah for the rest of the world for the longest time. Nevertheless, it's maintained good relationships with Russia. That North Korea has a massive stockpile of ammunition, which of course is in need by Russia at the moment to replenish its own supplies because it's burning through so much ammunition in Ukraine. And the same with North Koreans. I mean, they're interested in food supplies and technology. And it's part of this multipolar world that Russia doesn't operate on the basis of values. And so the human rights abuses, the political oppression, the lack of democracy are not really factors for Russia. It's a sort of quid pro quo transactional relationship that Kim Jong-un was in Moscow recently, and they were doing deals, actually Vladivostok, and they were doing deals where Russia supplies grains and technology, and North Korea is supplying arms to Russia. So it's part of that, and just bringing all these people together, these non-aligned countries, into this sort of transactional, cooperative coalition that, again, provides new markets, provides more allies, provides more headaches for the West. And I think that's part of the goal here, is that Putin's trying to bring all the other countries in the world under his banner and doesn't care too much about what their records are like or what their, how democratic they are. The values thing doesn't play a role as far as Russian foreign relations are concerned.
Right. So at this point, Russia, China, North Korea, this trifecta, if I may, what do you think will be the practical implications of them coming together?
Well, I think Japan is the one that's going to be worried, in so much as the US has a huge ally in Japan. It has half of its international bases, military bases, are in Japan. And that sits off the coast of, if you look at the seaboard there, China and Russia, the tensions in the South China Sea are very high. And if there's going to be a military conflict, then the US will be coming out of Japan. And North Korea directly threatens Japan in so much as the missiles it's been developing can now reach Japan. And so that's the card, the sword of Damocles, if you like, they're dangling over Japan. And so it's important to have North Korea as an ally because it comes to a fight in the South China Sea, and that looks, well, not likely, but it's increasingly possible. Those tensions are rising continuously. Then having North Korea on board would be important because, of course, it also threatens South Korea, which is also full of American bases and an American ally. And so it's just another card that's being prepared for what everyone is anticipating is going to be some sort of clash between the US and China. And Russia's already in that clash. So looking at Japan and Korea specifically, having North Korea on board is important.
All right. Mr. Ben Aris, thank you so much for joining us on WION with your perspective on this.
My pleasure.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.